And good evening and welcome to the Scanner Guys. I'm Jonathan Higgins and we've got a great show for tonight. And of course, many of you are familiar with database scanners, and with the creation of database scanners came using SD cards with these scanners. So we're going to talk about the overall history, how it all operates. We'll answer your questions at the end of the broadcast. So certainly post your questions in the comments. The other thing too is if you're new to the show, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Definitely that helps us along the way. So we're really excited to have all of you joining us tonight. We go through a slideshow presentation at the beginning, and then the second half we answer your questions. Typically the program lasts for about an hour. So hopefully we'll have a great presentation and some interesting conversation after the slideshow. So let's take a look at tonight's slideshow. As you can see here, it's all about SD cards and everything that you need to know. So definitely this is going to be quite an informative show. So sit back and relax, and we hope you learn a little bit more about SD cards and scanners. You want to make sure that you follow, like, and subscribe to our social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram at The Scanner Guys. Of course, you can visit the website, thescannerguyshow.com. You can shop the store. We've got all types of great swag on the website. You can also contact us and sign up for our newsletter as well. Contacting us, it may take a little bit longer than usual since this is a one-person operation, so sometimes it takes me a little bit to be able to get back to your emails. And certainly sign up for our newsletter. We don't always send a newsletter, but we occasionally do that. So we don't spam you. We don't share your information with any third parties or anything like that. Train Aficionado Live will be back next month. Wednesday, April the 5th. Wednesday nights, as always, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. We'll be live on the Train Aficionado YouTube channel. If you haven't checked out the program that runs opposite of the Scanner Guys, make sure you do that. Some great stuff on Train Aficionado Live. We basically talk about all types of various topics regarding rail fanning and trains and what have you. If you got a little bit of interest, tune in. We've got a great show over there as well. And make sure you subscribe to that channel. We've got some great stuff coming up on the channel on both Train Aficionado and the Scanner Guys for April. We're finally getting into spring, which I'm really excited about. Main topic of discussion tonight, SD cards and scanners. What you need to know. So let's take a look. So tonight we're going to be covering the history, capability, and how they work. So some good stuff here. So we're definitely going to cover that and tell you all about it. So a little bit of a timeline with the SD cards. Secure Digital is what basically it stands for. First standard SD card was created in August of 1999. Basically all the manufacturers, SanDisk, Panasonic, Toshiba, all the manufacturers finally sat down at one table and said, you know, we need to create a standard SD card. What ended up happening was everybody had their own different card, different size, different format. All that made it super complicated for people. You know, if you had, one particular SD card, it wouldn't work across different applications. So the great thing about it, they standardize the SD card. And as many of you know, if you're a digital photographer or you're into scanners, micro SD cards come in handy for several different applications, just like those I mentioned. And then a few years later, in 2004, micro SD cards were introduced. Basically, the size of your finger, probably your fingernail more so, a little bit smaller, more compact. And then in 2010, they got a little bit smaller. So basically, it's really small, fits right on, probably right on maybe your pinky, or slightly bigger than your pinky nail, but it got a little bit smaller. So of course, the I mixed that up. Sorry about that. So 2004, that's when the micro SD cards were introduced, and in 2010, in September, Uniden released the first scanner to ever have an SD card, the micro SD card, and the Uniden Home Patrol 1. I don't know what I was thinking reading that. As you can tell, it's a live show. All right, let's continue on. SD card equipped scanners. Wow, there's a big list here. Looking at your screen right now, you can see a whole bunch of Unidens, some Whistlers, some Radio Shacks, and some GREs. Let's take a look at a couple of the Unidens. So, of course, the Uniden Home Patrol came out in 2010. That was the first scanner to incorporate an SD card. And, of course, Uniden decided, hey, there was a huge hit for Uniden. They came out with the Home Patrol 2. But prior to that, we had the 436 and the 536. And then, of course, the current product line, the Cadillacs of Uniden's product line, the SDS 100 and 200, all of which incorporate the micro SD card. And then, of course, Whistler came out with their database scanners. And then all the WS models, there's several of them, the 1098, the 1095, the 1080, the 1088, and then, of course, the current product line, TRX1 and TRX2. But Whistler did something a little bit different. Basically, in the portable, it's the micro SD card, and then it's the full SD card on the TX2, and then the mobile radios, that followed suit before that one, such as the 1095 and the 1088. Radio Shack, while it was still around towards the tail end, had a few models that used the SD card, as you see there. And then, of course, GRE, who can forget the PSR 800 and 700. But yeah, I mean, these radios all have an SD card, whether it be a micro or a full-size SD card. You can see there on the scanner that's on the screen, the 536 HP takes the micro SD card, and you can see the SD card slot just below the keypad there. So let's continue on. So, of course, we had to promote the radios that don't have an SD card, such as the 996, the 15X, the 325, the 125AT, the 30, the 1065, and the 1040. These are current radios that do not have the SD card. They're also what we call clean slate scanners. Basically means that the database is not built into these radios. You need to program it for the areas you're looking to listen to. So certainly, program the radios up. You need third-party software such as Butel software for those corresponding radios. Or if you have a lot of time on your hands, you can program it through the keypad. It's a little bit more challenging with those trunking systems. For conventional channels, it can be a little bit easier. So let's go over the folders across the board. Let's start at the database. So the database in these scanners are maintain a complete copy of the radio reference database on the SD card. Allows quick programming on the fly by entering in a location. So that's basically your zip code programming. So punching in that zip code into your scanner, it basically looks at the database and says, what is in this zip code? And then basically the radio populates the information in. My favorite is scan lists and favorites list. That's the stored programming. That's also kept on the SD card. So when you create your favorites list, those are all stored on the SD card. And those favorites lists are basically a little text file. Doesn't take up very much space at all on the SD card. And then we've got something that sucks up a lot of space, and that's the recording folder. Most SD card scanners also support recording of the over-the-air radio transmissions that you're hearing. They'll be stored to the SD card. So those recordings do take up a lot of space. So that's where you may want to look at a larger SD card if you're using the SD card to store those recordings. If you're never going to use the SD card to store recordings and you're going to create tons and tons of scan lists or favorites lists, typically the SD card that comes with the radio is beneficial. And the other thing, let's talk about the big firmware. So Uniden scanners write firmware updates to the SD card, which is then installed into the radio. So typically, let's say you're using Sentinel software and you check to see if there's a firmware update. So what it's going to do is going to check what's on the scanner and then communicate to Uniden's server. And then it's going to say, oh, you need new firmware. So basically what ends up happening is it downloads the latest firmware from the Uniden server onto the SD card. And then it will install it on the scanner. So basically, once you've downloaded the firmware to the scanner and you eventually reboot the radio, what's going to happen is when you power up the radio, it's then going to see in that particular folder, ooh, there's new firmware. So the radio will then download that firmware into the actual radio itself, and then that takes a little bit of time. So if you're running a portable radio, you may want to plug into an outlet or make sure your batteries are properly charged, or you have brand new alkaline batteries in there, because you do not want an interruption while it's writing the firmware. As for the base mobiles, just make sure you don't interrupt, the process when doing that. So all some good stuff there. So basically, those are some of the key folders: the database, stored programming, recordings, and of course on the Uniden radios, firmware. But we're going to tell you something about the Whistler radios that operates slightly different in a moment. How the SD card works on the Uniden radios. So we went over the folders: database, stored programming, recording, and firmware. All right, so the scanner startup. So basically it checks to make sure the SD card is there. Now, have you ever started your radio without the SD card in there? It will come up with an error and say, hey, I'm not able to start. I don't see that SD card. So it's kind of like, if you take the battery out of your car and you try to turn the ignition, it's not going to start. It needs that battery, essentially, for juice. In this case, it needs the scanner needs to see that SD card's present, because it's going to look at various folders to do various actions. Without an SD card, the radio is like, what do I do now? So with the firmware, when it sees new firmware, it downloads it to a particular folder. And then it installs it to the radio when it's disconnected from the computer. The firmware file is then erased from the SD card, preventing it from being loaded again the next time the radio turns on. So that file that gets downloaded to that folder, once it's installed into the radio, it disappears. It goes away. Programming. There is no firmware file present after that. It then loads what the scanner needs to do. Whether it's scanning a favorites list or the full database. It's looking to see, what do I do next? And you, of course, can go to Set Scan Selection and Location Settings to basically see what it was doing the last time it started, whether it was running the full database for a particular zip code or it was looking towards a favorites list. So let's say you had a favorites list for Cincinnati, Ohio. So you shut the radio off, you turn it back on. It's going to know, yeah, I was scanning last time I was on Cincinnati, Ohio, so it's going to scan that again. So basically, it's not going to start doing its own thing. It's going to remember what it was doing last when you had the radio on. So this is all stuff that it's doing at startup. It's one, checking to see if the SD card's there. Two, it's seeing, is there anything in the firmware folder? Then the next thing, it's looking towards the programming and saying, all right, what do I do? What do I scan? So that's exactly how it works with Uniden scanners. Now, I mentioned this before. This is where you probably want to consider getting a larger SD card. Recording scanner audio. WAV files are stored, and basically it's stored by date and time format. So you know how sometimes your radio will prompt you, to put in the date, put in the time. So that's how the WAV files are saved. It becomes a part of the file name. So every time there's a radio transmission, that file will be saved with a date and time format. And then, of course, these audio recordings are saved to the recordings folder. And then later on, you can pop this SD card into an SD card reader and then download these WAV files and then use them however way you feel fit. So, some people like, for instance, I'm not too sure if this is how Danny Harmon does it when he does his distant signals videos, but this would be a great way for him to do it, to run a radio that he's just strictly grabbing scanner audio, railroad communications. And then basically all the WAV files are saved onto the SD card. And then when he's editing his videos, he can add in the scanner audio with the video, basically pulling the full WAV file, putting it on to the video in key spots where it needs to be. That's one way it can be done. Or maybe, you're monitoring some sort of incident that's going on and you want to listen back to all the radio transmissions, you can do that as well. So lots of great handy ways of being able to listen to the radio transmissions, again. Data is always being saved to the SD card. Believe it or not, it's constantly saving. So let's look at some of the stuff that it's saving. Of course, let's say we're running a favorites list or a scan list, and you hit lockout on one of the channels. It's going to save that. It's either going to know it's a temporary lockout, or if you do a permanent lockout, it's going to save it as a permanent lockout. So the next time you reboot your radio, it's going to know that that particular channel or talk group, you permanently locked it out. So you don't want it scanning anymore. So it's going to have that one set to lockout. And of course, anytime you're making edits on the actual scanner to the favorites list. So let's say you add a channel. You do it through the keypad or the touch screen. You add in another channel. That's going to save to the favorites list. Of course, it's going to save the recordings. If you've got the replay feature on the Uniden radios, that's going to be saving to the SD card. And then if you make any changes to the scanner settings, that will save to the SD card as well. Now, you probably watched a lot of times that we've talked about turning off the recording feature or turning off the replay feature. Now, the thing with that, if you have this scanner, let's say in my case, I have a 536 in my vehicle, and you turn off the ignition switch and you have the scanner powered by basically when the car is on. So basically when you turn the ignition off, it's an abrupt shutdown on the scanner. It's a hard shutdown. It's not like you went over and turned the knob and turned the scanner off. You're basically cutting power when the ignition is cut power. So that basically means it's abrupt shutdown. Now, we've noticed when a lot of people started getting these scanners, and especially with the recording feature on, or the replay feature on, that people were getting the corrupt SD card error. So we were able to figure out, okay, do you have recordings on or replay on? Yes. Why don't you try turning it off? Once they were able to turn off that feature, it eliminated the issue with SD card corruption for the most part. So basically, for example, you think of it. So a radio transmission gets transmitted over your scanner, and basically the radio transmission ends. So the scanner and the SD card are still saving that audio wave file. So you go to kill the transmission. Guess what happens? That wave file doesn't get to save completely, which then causes a corrupt file on there. So the next time you boot up the scanner, guess what it's going to tell you? It's got a corrupt file. It's not able to read properly. It's not able to work correctly. And then you got to go through the process of reformatting the card and then resetting it up for that particular radio. So if you're not using recording or replay, turn it off. If you are using it, you don't want to do abrupt shutdowns. You want to make sure that when you're shutting the scanner off, you're doing it by the knob or the button, and you're making sure that it shuts down properly. A lot of information there. Hopefully everybody understands that. We'll continue on. All right, remember I mentioned Whistler radios, totally different beast. How the SD card works with the Whistler radios. Most of the same protocols as listed for the Uniden scanner apply to the Whistler radios with a few exceptions. Whistler will do an integrity check, and that seems to take much longer than on the Uniden radios. And it takes even longer on the larger SD card. This is why the smaller capacity cards may work best for you. So take, for instance, if you got a 2 gigabyte SD card and you decide to throw in a 16 gig SD card, it may take longer to be able to boot up on the Whistler radio. So in some cases, large isn't always best. In this case, if you don't like waiting for your radio to boot up and you want it to boot up faster, smaller is better with the Whistler. The other thing that's kind of peculiar is Whistler scanners do not load the firmware to the SD cards. They do not. So basically, when it's connected up to the computer, it downloads from the Whistler server and then goes directly to the radio and installs on the radio. So it's not going to the card and then rebooting the radio like the Uniden and then storing directly to the radio after that. So it goes directly to the radio. The other funky thing with the Whistler radios is there's no Butel software in the database scanners. You only can use the Whistler/GRE software. So there's only one deal in town for programming those radios. With the Uniden, you have the Sentinel software, and then of course you have Butel software that you can do as well. The TRX2, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is has a larger SD card. It's got the full-size SD card, where the TRX1 has a smaller SD card. You can, if you wanted to, use a mini to full-size adapter with it. Dave, I see your comment. I'll completely agree with you, Dave. You are absolutely right. The Whistler programming software is quite hard to navigate. For me, I find, for a novice entering into the hobby, the Sentinel software, which was created by Uniden, is more user-friendly for that novice. And then when you go into a Whistler software to program the TRX1 or 2, it's a little bit more to it. So it's not made for the novice. So there's a little bit more learning there. John, John's agreeing with you, Dave. It is quite challenging. I mean, for the most part, to be absolutely honest with you guys, I have the TRX1 and 2. I don't use it as a daily runner just because of, the software is not my favorite thing to operate. I mean, I can operate it, but it's not easy and simple. It's not, something that's, relatively quick and fast to get into. Let's continue on. I love these. And you can pick these up pretty cheap. If you frequently shop B&H Photography, I talk about them all the time. Or you can pick this up at Best Buy. And this is well worth the money. So this is one of these SD card readers. And a lot of times they have both options. And this one here you can see has the micro slot and then the full-size SD card slot. So let's say you do have that 536 in your vehicle. Do you really want to take the scanner out? No. You want to pop out that SD card, bring it into the house, connect it up to your Windows machine. Now remember, none of the scanners are embraced Mac, so you have to connect it up to a Windows machine. So you grab your adapter here, you plug in that micro SD card into the slot, and then basically open up Sentinel or the Butel software that's compatible with that particular radio, and it reads and writes to that SD card. So let's say you did bring in the 536 and you connect it up to the computer using the programming cable. That 536 is basically one big SD card reader in this sense. So when you're operating this SD, bringing your scanner into the house and connecting it up, it's one big ass, SD card reader, essentially. So basically, you plug it in and it's going to read the SD card and write to it. So basically, the software is only communicating to the card itself. Now, keep in mind, if you're running Whistler, guess what? You're going to pull that radio out of the car because the firmware doesn't write to the SD card. So that TRX2, you got to pull it out and you got to put it in the house and connect it up if you want to write the firmware. If you want to do anything else with it, yeah, sure. You can write it to the SD card. You want to update the database or create some scan list? Yes. But yeah, I mean, that's some of the pains of it. So when you're looking at the radios, you got to figure out, okay, so how often do I going to update the firmware? And if I got a TRX2, guess what? I got to either do one or two things. I got to pull the scanner out of the car, or I got to bring the laptop out to the scanner. If you got a Uniden radio, guess what? You can do everything on the SD card. You can update the internal database, you can update your favorites list, and you can update the firmware. So I think I'm singing Joe Bearcat's song here, promoting that, those products that Joe promotes. We'll leave it at that. Let's continue on. All right. So what's the deal? Small, medium, large. What is it? Grande is what they call it at Starbucks. So the Grande that you can do, the largest SD card that's recommended is the 32 gig max storage. You probably could do bigger, but I think we've talked about this in the past, and the 32 is the safe bet. The smallest is the 2 gig. So when you're replacing your SD card, and I recommend doing this, eventually, if you've got your scanner for 5 or 6 years, you may want to replace the SD card with a brand new one. Of course, it's getting older. It may be running a little bit slow, and so on and so forth. What do we recommend? Don't get the cheap, knockoff brand. This is the time where you actually want to buy the name brand. It's kind of like, with mayonnaise or things like that. You want to, sometimes, the name brand is a benefit. Actually, I found some pretty good mayonnaises that are knocked off. I'm trying to think of something. Windex. Sometimes, you go to the Dollar Tree or whatever, and they get some knockoff brand. And it leaves your windows all, streaky. And of course, Windex does a great job of cleaning your windows. It's not streaky. So that's a case where the name brand does the job. You may get the Kleenex brand, and you're sick as a dog, and your nose is not getting all worn out essentially from blowing your nose, and you get that knockoff brand, and it's John Wayne tough and rough and tough and doesn't take any. We'll leave it alone at that. Anyway, so let's take a look at this. So we've got the SanDisk, which I'd strongly recommend. And you want to do like the Ultra Plus or, the high endurance SD cards. You want to do something that's going to be able to take a lot of abuse, especially if you're recording audio. Now, remember, we talked about recording audio. So if you are recording audio, you want to go with that 32 gig SD card. If you're not recording audio, maybe you do a 2 gig or 5 gig or a 16 gig. Now remember, those scan lists and those favorites lists are text files. They're little tiny text files. They're not going to take up hardly any space. You could have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of favorites lists. So I would probably recommend, one, name brand. SanDisk is one of them. High endurance SD cards. Now the other thing that I want to recommend to you, do not go to the local pharmacy and purchase these. You're going to pay top dollar if you roll into any of those corner pharmacies. I'm not going to name them, but you're going to pay top dollar. You may even pay top dollar going to the big box store. Places I would recommend buying the SD cards, believe it or not, is B&H Photo. They actually have these SD cards priced at a reasonable price. The other place that you could take a look is, of course, the big online box store, Amazon. Typically, Amazon, B&H Photography are going to have these SD cards at a reasonable price. You will literally, if you go to the pharmacy, the corner pharmacy, you're going to pay an arm and a leg, and maybe another arm, and maybe another leg. All right, let's continue on. Reforming the SD card. Of course, you can do it on a Windows machine, basically by putting it into the SD card reader and basically right-clicking and selecting a format, reformatting. Another alternative is you can download, the SD card memory card formatter, which you can download at this website here. It's a free and useful tool, and it's a great tool to maintain those SD cards. So if you do corrupt an SD card, you have the ability of saving it by reformatting it and then basically following the instructions with reformatting it. Joe mentions, oh man, that's a whole nother conversation with the counterfeit SD cards. They may look like, the name brand and be slightly different. So be cautious of buying it from places such as eBay. It's kind of like, those Coach bags with the logo slightly altered or whatever it may be. So be careful of that. You want to buy it from a reputable store. I guess B&H will be the most reputable. And then of course, any other place, that's, it's got a reputation, essentially. You're looking at eBay, it's just some Joe or some Jane on there selling their wares, and, some of it may be counterfeit. So how the heck do we do it on the Uniden radio? Once we've reformatted our card, we basically go into the software. It's going to show this SD card is not having a name or not having a serial number. It's going to come up with probably XXX or something like that. Dave mentions another place before I get into this. Sam, Costco, up in the Northeast, BJ's, which is another big box store type of thing where you can buy, your gallon of ketchup and your 30 cans of tuna. But yeah, essentially, so how do you do a Micro Center? Oh, John, don't get me started with Micro Center. I could go spend a fortune in there, John. Micro Center is another great place to buy these SD cards. And then it's even better when they have it on sale. Joe, that's crazy. That's very much true. Some of these resellers are not even aware they're selling counterfeit cards, which, yeah, stay away from those places that, may be a little shady. All right, so let's get back to this slide here that we're looking at right now. So reformatting that SD card. So we basically did all of our business with reformatting everything. All the files and everything are all deleted and gone off of it. So I'm covering tonight, I'm not worrying about the whistlers, but we'll talk about the Unidens. Basically, once this is done, you're going to connect it up to the Sentinel software, and you're going to click on Clear User Data. It's under the Scanner tab. So basically, what this is going to do is it's going to see the SD card, you're going to select it, and then it's going to basically do its own cleaning and then writing to the SD card. So basically, it's going to put in all the folders that belong there and kind of get it all set up. So the next step is you definitely want to probably update on that SD card the update the database, write that to the radio, write your favorites list. You can even write the latest edition of the firmware as well, so you can do all that. Fry's Electronics. That was a cool store. I went out there, a while back when I went out to Las Vegas. That was a really cool store. I mean, that was one of the few places, of this time, way back, that you could actually see Uniden radios in a store. I mean, most of the time now, the only time you see a Uniden radio is if Walmart or Target has got a 125 AT on the shelf, and that's even rare. Yeah, Fry's is gone. I mean, a lot of electronics stores have gone out the window, such as Circuit City was big in the United States, and that was another electronics store. They didn't sell scanners. And then there was, what was it, Leechmere or something? I can't remember. And they had a good electronics selection there too. All right, so formatting that SD card, you can do it with the Sentinel software. So basically, you'll first do this clear user data. It'll put in all the files and folders where they belong, and then basically you'll write to the SD card. You'll write the current database. You'll then write any favorites lists and what such, and you can even load that latest firmware. All right, well, that is everything that you need to know about SD cards. What I can do is we'll talk a little bit, answer some questions if you have any. But yeah, I mean, this is the thing with these SD cards. I mean, I have my radios here, and basically I'll turn it. Now, the other tip I can give you: don't eject the SD card while the scanner is running. Not a good idea. So what you make sure is you power it down. You're going to use your little, if you've got a little bit of fingernail, you're going to use that and pop it out. Now, other tips I can give you. If you got a 436, oh shoot. If you got a 436, a live show, of course. I got to make sure I'm sliding this in right. So 436, that door that's in there, it's behind the battery. Be gentle. Don't go in there like Giant Al and manhandle it. You want to make sure that you gently pop it open. The little metal thing door will pop up. You slide the SD card out, and do what you need to do with it, and then put it back in gently. So you want to take your time. You want to remember how you ejected it out and how you put it back in. So you don't want to be in a rush doing this. You want to make sure you're doing this where you're under some light so you can see what you're doing, and then go from there. You don't want to go in there because you will knock that metal door right out. So that's on the 436 and the SDS 100. On some of the other radios, it's relatively simple. On the SDS, not the SDS, the SDS 200 and the 536 ejects from the front panel, easy peasy. On the Home Patrol 1 and 2, take the battery door off, take the batteries out. Yeah, you got to work for it. At least with, I think, Uniden's thought process, you got to take the batteries out. Hopefully you're not powering the, running the power when you eject it out. But you want to make sure that you power the radio off, take the batteries out, and then that's an easy eject out of there. It just ejects out of the slot. Pay attention to how it was put in so you can put it back in again. And then basically, use your SD card reader, or with those portable radios, if you don't want to fuss with it, connect it directly up to the computer. Whistler radios. All right, so Whistler radios. There's a slot on the TRX1. God, I don't have one in front of me, but it slides in. And then on the TRX2, you have to take off the remote head, essentially. And then it's a large SD card. Yeah, Joe Bearcat, he's trying to describe it as his best ability. Basically, he flips the scanner, lets the door rest against the case, and then inserts the micro SD card and flips it back over. So you want to make sure that you're not in a rush doing this. I know some people, they're in there. Oh boy, I get to program my radio. Let me get out the SD card, and then the next thing they know, they have the SD card and the little metal that's holding it in place in their hand. I've seen people break it. Basically, you can take a little piece of tape. You basically have to make sure that the metal, I'm not too sure if you can see this, the metal is lined up with the pins on the actual radio. So basically the contacts. And then basically you can tape it in on that particular radio. But you got to be careful. The other thing too, which I almost did on camera, is if you tilt this up by accident in some radios, you could end up sliding the SD card inside the radio and completely missing the spot where the SD card needs to sit. I believe on the Whistler radio, if you're not careful and you overshoot or go too high or too low, you can send the SD card into the radio literally, and it'll move all about, which is going to cause some issues. You have to open up your radio, carefully find it, and get it out of there. But be very, very careful. That's all I can say with that. Let's see here. What are we talking about here? That is a good suggestion, Radios 80. Copying all the SD card data to an online cloud. So, God forbid your computer crashes, you don't lose the data. Basically, it's up in the cloud, essentially, and then you just access those files and do what you need. Yeah, that's the great thing about, this day and age with having scanners that have, like little micro hard drives in there. We totally recommend having multiple SD cards. Reason being, so let's say you go on a road trip and you get the SD card in the radio. It's been working great for years. And then you're traveling about, you restart the car, and for whatever reason, the SD card's corrupt. It's no good. You don't have your laptop, or let's say you do have your laptop and you still got another 5 hours in the car. Now you don't have your scanner to listen to because that SD card is corrupt. And you don't want to dig out your laptop and try to reformat and all this business and, be pulled over for at least a half hour getting this all done. What we recommend is creating a secondary card, which I would totally recommend. So, of course, taping it on the battery door on the portable, or having it somewhere in the vehicle in a cool spot where it's not in direct sunlight. Basically, having that backup SD card means that you'll never need it. But if you do need it, let's say the SD card becomes corrupt, basically what you do is you grab your backup SD card, put that in the scanner, you're back in business again. I can't say enough about it, but the thing is, if you're going to do a backup SD card, every time that you do a database update to the whole entire database, or create any new or edit favorites lists, you need to make sure you do it on both SD cards. You need to do it on the one that's primary in the radio, and you also need it to do it on the backup. You need to do it on both, because if you don't, you're SOL, because you don't have the new favorites list that you created for this road trip. So definitely do it, on both the primary and the backup, and then you should be good to go. And as Murphy, I believe it's Murphy's law, if you have the backup, you'll never need it. If you never create the backup, there'll be that one time, when you're doing that road trip or whatever it may be, and the SD card gets corrupt. Yeah, Joe Bearcat mentions, great suggestion, throwing that backup SD card in your glove department. They're cheap enough. Anyone can have several spares. I mean, that's the great thing about it. So yeah, I mean, having that backup is certainly handy. I could tell you that I was on a trip one time. I think I was camping, and I had the 436 sitting by the campfire, and of course I thought I powered the radio down. So here I am. I take the battery door off, and I pop the batteries out, and I put the new batteries in. I clearly didn't power it down. So when I put the new batteries in and I turn it on, guess what? I had a SD card error. Of course, I didn't have a laptop with me, so there goes that scanner for the weekend. But yeah, I mean, definitely, having that backup is certainly great. And, as I mentioned earlier, replacing that SD card every few years is certainly a great thing to do. Swelling up that's funny. Jim, I have one of these batteries right in front of me. I haven't had the issue with the battery swelling. I do notice when I have it plugged in, let's say you're charging the battery inside the radio, I find that it does get a little bit warm. Best bet I would recommend, I'm wondering if you're powering or charging up the battery in the radio, you may want to pick up a battery charger. Scanner Master sells the battery charger, which you could use with your scanner. Basically drop it in there, charge it in the charger, and then if, God forbid, this battery swells up, it's not doing it in your radio, it's doing it in the charger. I mean, the charger, I forget how much it is. I can't remember. It's not $650 like the portable. So it's not like you're damaging a $650 radio. You can go buy another battery charger at a lot less than replacing your whole radio. Chris mentions he always has two, for his scanner. And then he makes sure if he's going out of town, he makes sure he has another, what is it? Oh, he always has two of his, wow, Chris. So he's not even talking about having a backup SD card. He's got two radios with him in case there's ever any issues. So, Chris, you are prepared, sir. You've got your primary radio and your secondary radio ready to go. So you actually have, your scanners lined up. That's for sure. Yeah, and the other thing too that I since we're on the topic of batteries, you're not using your radio for an extended period of time, take the battery out. Like right now, I haven't used my SDS right here. There's no battery in it right now. So the battery, this is actually the battery that belongs in this radio. Believe me, the radio is a lot lighter without the battery. But yeah, so basically when you're not using the radio, take the battery out. And then of course, I notice when I When I do that at times, sometimes it holds its charge a little bit better. And the other thing too, you don't want to leave this in direct sunlight or anything where it could get, this is a black battery. It could get very hot and damage it. So yeah, you want to make sure that it's stored somewhere safe and secure. Randy, a great question. I probably would do all the initial work in Sentinel software. Because Sentinel software actually has, where I showed earlier on the slide deck. Let me show that again. Share my screen one more time. So right here, so Randy, let's say you get a brand new SD card, what I would recommend is going to the Sentinel software, depending on if you're doing Home Patrol or 536, 436, SDS 100, 200, depending on which software. You would go up to the scanner tab and then clear user data. And then basically it's going to reformat that SD card the way it needs to be for the radio with the folders where it needs to be. And then once that initial work is done, then you can go to your software of choice and then load those favorites lists or scan lists. So I would probably do it within the Sentinel software. Then once you have the groundwork laid, update the database. And then if you are using Sentinel, put it in those favorites lists. If you're using some other third-party software, then you could run over to that third-party software and then save those favorites lists onto that brand new SD card. So I probably would do the initial heavy lifting with the Sentinel software at first. Yeah, it's quite interesting, a lot of things, like you read on Radio Reference, some people will have a freak thing with a radio where it does something wacky. And then people will read that post on Radio Reference like, oh man, that's happening to all the radios. No, it could be a freak thing. But yeah, I haven't had any issues. I'm going to physically knock on wood with any of the batteries swelling for the SDS 100, which is great. I've noticed, if I do charge the battery inside the radio, the compartment tends to get a little bit warm, but I have an external charger, so I use that now. I don't charge any batteries inside the radio. I'll charge it right inside that battery charger. Any other questions before we wrap it up? Certainly post it in the comments. I'm going to do a couple of slides before we wrap up things. I'll grab any last minute questions when I return back. So let's take a look at a couple of things that are coming up. Let me get this lined up here. So we want to remind you, of course, to check out the Scanner Guys store. It's at the scannerguyshow.com. We now have these awesome baseball hats. They're actually embroidered. They do cost a little bit more than the other hats, but they look awesome. I believe we even have a beanie. We have camouflage. We have a camouflage hat, which looks really cool. So the show is brought to you by you guys. You guys make this show happen each and every week. And we appreciate you. You buying stuff at our merch store, you using the affiliate link through ScannerMaster, basically is posted right in the description of this video. If you use that affiliate link, that sends a little bit of cash our way, and of course, we get a little bit from the merch store. We actually do have several bills that we pay each and every year for the web hosting and for the software that we stream out, the broadcast each and every week. We're not just using, some run-of-the-mill thing. We're actually using a really cool software to be able to stream out this broadcast each and every week. So we appreciate you guys, helping us out along the way, whether it be the ScannerMaster affiliate link or shopping our merch store. And then, of course, subscribing to the channel. I'm not too sure if many of you have checked. We're almost at 6,000 subscribers. So let's see, maybe by the next time that we're back together again, maybe we'll be at 6,000 subscribers. So certainly check out our channel and the other videos. Subscribe to the channel. Check out Scanner Master through our affiliate link. And of course, the ScannerGuysShow.com website, and check out the store there. Train Aficionado Live. We'll be back with you the Wednesday, April the 5th, which is not next week. It's the following week. This is a month that has 5 Wednesdays, so I'll actually take the week off next week, re-energize, get ready for a month of cool shows in April. So, of course, we'll be back Wednesday, April the 5th, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. And, of course, the Scanner Guys. Mark your calendars. That'll be Wednesday, April the 12th. So make sure you tune in, and we're looking forward to that. So, as always, follow, like, and subscribe to our social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. You can shop our store at our website, contact us, and subscribe to the newsletter. So that was our topic tonight, SD cards and scanners, everything you need to know. So hopefully we've answered some questions and made you a little bit more comfortable with either with your SD card scanner or looking at purchasing one of these SD card scanners. It's not something to be afraid of, and we greatly appreciate everybody watching tonight. The SD card for the Whistler TRX1, that would be your mini, your micro SD card. So it's the smaller one. That's the, that's just like on your 436 or 536 or most of the Uniden radios. It looks just like this. This is actually the 4 gig. I believe this is the SD card that came with the scanner. And I'm not too sure if I have a high endurance one. Actually, I do. Before we wrap this up, I'll show you the high endurance SD card that I have. Hopefully I don't get these. Oh, shoot. I actually ejected it out. I didn't follow my own instructions, and I injected it out while it was on. So I'm going to turn that off. And this is the high endurance one. Oops, there we go. And we're going to see what actually happens now that I put this back in. See if I've corrupted my own SD card. So let's see, it's going to reboot. And I didn't do anything wrong with it. Woo! I don't have to reformat it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. We appreciate you guys watching the Scanner Guys. The Scanner Guys is just not me. It's all of you that watch the show, guys and gals. We're all Scanner Guys. I appreciate you watching the show. We'll see you next month. And we hope that you stay safe out there and have a great night. I'm Jonathan Higgins. Until next time, be safe.